Welcome to Make Growth Happen, the podcast designed to empower small and medium businesses with actionable insights and proven strategies to drive sales and elevate their marketing effectiveness. I'm your host, Garth Fasano, president and co-founder of Rainmaker, and this podcast is your go-to resource for navigating the complexities of modern sales and marketing. Each episode features inspiring conversations with successful SMB owners who have scaled their business, vendors offering cutting-edge solutions, and sales leaders with a proven track record. Together, we'll uncover innovative tactics, share real-world stories, and explore key strategies that lead to sustainable growth. Whether you're looking for practical tips, strategic advice, or just the inspiration to take your business to the next level, Make Growth Happen is here to guide you and support you on your journey to thrive in today's competitive market. Welcome to our first episode with Jason Trinka, the Vice President of Sales and co-founder at Rainmaker. Jason, welcome.
Hey, Garth. I'm happy to be here and happy holidays to everybody. I'm a Colorado native. I'm a husband. I'm a father. And I love my family, the outdoors, and anything that has action or adrenaline pumping involved in it. And of course, sales. I love sales. I've been in sales most of my life, and I usually tell people that most of life is sales. But my journey here and what brought me to be in this role and position is all about creating meaningful relationships and the conversations with people. And I think it all starts there. So I'm excited to be here and excited to talk more sales.
Awesome. And so tell me a little bit more about how this journey started, because I think your experience in sales is actually pretty unique. When a lot of people talk about sales, they think about, oh, I do B2B software sales, or I'm selling very large deals. That is not what we are doing here at Rainmaker, and that's not what you've been doing for most of your career. So tell me a little bit more about that specifically.
Honestly, the B2C sales started about 16 years ago when we hopped in and co-founded the company. And we saw a gap in how businesses, particularly the ones in the home services space, connected with their customers over the phone. And it wasn't just about answering or responding. It was about creating these meaningful and trust-based conversations that could end up being fostered into longer-term relationships. And it started just on the front lines of doing sales, learning processes and iterating it. And it grew into a company, honestly, that we were able to roll out to the rest of the world.
Awesome. So, and what brought you into home services sales? Again, there's so many places that you can take sales in your career. And so what drew you into this specific area?
It's got heart. And that's the biggest thing. I love the fact that you can represent small business owners and directly deal with clients. You're dealing with the front end problems, the emotional relationships, and the things that, in my opinion, have the most impact for the business owner, also for the customer. And I've always loved operating from a multiple win perspective or a triple win perspective. We get to pair more consumers with their solutions. We get to help more small and medium business owners get more business. And at the end of the day, it's a win for us when those two things are happening.
In what you just said, you also mentioned something really interesting. You said represent small business owners. What are some representative types of companies you've represented? And what do you mean by that? And how does that actually work? How does a business represent a small business? That seems like a really difficult thing to do, where, you could see in a world where, I'm sure big companies like Comcast and Cox, they outsource their sales to other providers. But how do you do that on a small business level?
Yeah, I think that the best way for sales to be done is when you are directly tied to a business or a representative of that business. And that's something that I've always wanted to bring to the sales that we do, is a local look and a local feel. I feel like it's paramount to success in sales.
All right. So now that we've sort of set the frame for the types of companies we're talking about here, local small businesses, franchises, home service. So thinking like what has been classically mom and pops have been targeted a lot, especially in the franchise space, by private equity or the search community, and bringing a more sophisticated approach to those sales. So in your experience, Jason, what are a couple of the most important things to be successful in this type of B2C sales motion?
Pricing and packaging is the thing that comes to my mind first and foremost. So much of the time, people operate their business under exception-based policies where they make a policy that's around something that happens a minority of the time and it affects the majority capture rate of sales. Or they're packaging themselves with too little value or far too much expense, or it's far too convoluted an offer. A great example is we were working with a neighborly company who uses a chemical product to treat home pest control for home services. And the owner was using the gallons of used material to price for the way that they sold to consumers. And explaining that to a consumer got in the way so much of just having the sale happen. So simplifying offers, making them something that can be packaged and bite sized for a consumer is something that I see a lot of times businesses miss when they're creating their sales processes. Also, just building trust from the first hello, from the first interaction, actively listening, uncovering what they're saying, but also what they're not saying, reading in between the lines. And with some of the new technology like radar, it allows us to have this trust building start before we're actually verbally on the phones with people, before those live human interactions. It's been so incredible to witness stuff like that.
Yeah, so a couple of things you mentioned in there that I really want to touch on. And the first is Radar is our integrated sales and marketing CRM platform available from Rainmaker, but that's just a little bit of context for everyone. But you mentioned two things on packaging as well as building trust. And I think these are probably some of the most important elements. There are many important elements, but these two are particularly important. You gave a great story of how to simplify it. Having listened to a lot of sales calls like this myself and having done many myself, I want to just sort of clarify on the packaging part is what's really critical in these types of home services companies is that generally the sales motion is over the phone. Many companies and organizations are trying to make these more self-service, but we still haven't seen the buying decisions from consumers actually happen that way yet. And so because this is over the phone, it needs to be able to be communicated really simply and easily. We need clear pricing, clear packaging, making it very understandable. So I think one of the things that we've seen is that there's an opportunity for a consumer to drive a wedge in the sales process if it is more complex. And I think you gave a great example of a way that you've simplified this for companies. The next thing on building trust, give me what are some ways that we do that? Because, from an outsider's perspective, building trust might be even harder for an organization like ours because we're not sitting at the front desk of that business. We're not embedded in their operations day to day. And so how do we actually do that? And what are some of the ways that we actually might be doing it better?
Well, and functionally we are. So we get in and it is same as if we were sitting in the front line of that business. And that's one of the best parts about the Rainmaker system and how we operate is it should feel like we are part of that business, like we barbecue with them on the weekends, like we've known them since they started and launched that business.
Because we have, by the way.
Because in all honesty, for many of these people, yeah, absolutely. But making sure that we have the ability to respond quickly, but in the right way. So many times there's this trade-off in terms of quick response and use of information. And what the radar system does and what we've done here at Rainmaker is we've blended those two so that there's an amazingly quick response to someone reaching out, but it's so very tailored to exactly what they're needing. And it's used by humans. It's human in the loop AI is a term that I keep hearing and throwing around because it's exactly what it is. It's using that blend of technology managed and ran by humans that we found has been so successful in creating that trust from that first reach out point.
And so to tie into that building trust, is this a scripted process the way sales conversations are happening, or is it free form? And tell me a little bit more of what that looks like.
There's parts of it that are guided, but I've always hated the word script in sales. So I feel like it's more a flow than anything else. And rapport, it starts with empathy and enthusiasm and the ability to use the information that's been provided. And so part of it is just greeting the customers with energy, mirroring their tone, finding that genuine connection point. And it could be their situation, it could be their goals, it could be something as simple as like their dog's name if it's in the dog training space, or even if it's not. But people buy from people they like, and a friendly, interested tone can sometimes make the difference in that. But also, no one likes to take the time and submit information for it to be ignored either. So you got to use the info, or you can lose the sale. And that's something that blending those two things well, you can only script to a certain degree before you have to implement training and follow through with agents to make sure that that follows through in the sales process.
Totally makes sense. I've always kind of hated the word script too. I think another really important moment in the sales process in B2C sales and all sales is really handling objections. And so tell me a little bit about what you've learned over the years and the best way to do that.
Handling objections. Ooh, that's a fun one. We see a lot of people make a lot of mistakes on the back end when it comes to handling objections. They try and jump into it too quickly. They have the answer. They want to provide the solution. But actually slowing that process down, letting the client feel more heard, and being able to talk to them on a one-to-one basis and get through the initial hurdle. Many times the first objection isn't a real objection. It's just them saying, I don't know enough, or I don't feel comfortable enough to say yes right now in this moment. So peeling back the layers and figuring out a little bit more about what the true objection is, it's a dance as much as it is anything else. It's an art form, and being able to navigate through those waters is something that we do really well.
So like what's a way that that happens? Like what's a common objection and how would you respond to that? Like let's make this come alive a little bit more.
I think the most common objection that we hear across all sales spaces is, ooh, that's a lot of money. I'm going to have to talk it over with blank. Husband, wife, mother, brother, sister, father, aunt, uncle, etc. And the first part of that becomes, let's take it down and understand it a little bit more. So outside of the cost, is there any, concerns that you think that they would have? Or, putting the price aside, is there any concerns that you think that they would have? Just finding out more about price versus value, because most often when people have pricing objections, it's really a value objection. They don't understand the value for what they're getting. So going directly at it, and then from there, I'm not expecting them to necessarily have a budget in mind or things like that. It's another great way to overcome a pricing objection. Is there a budget you were trying to kind of work within? Or and I'm infamous for my hanging oars in sales. It's something that I think allows customers to jump in, save you, say something more. Especially on the phone, one of the things that we have to use is tone, intonation, silence, and sometimes it can be really, really hard to have a silent spot in a call. It can feel uncomfortable at first, but knowing how to use silence as a sales tool can be so valuable on the back end of navigating some of these objections, because people hate silence. They want to jump in, they want to say more, they want to give you more information.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to let them.
You've mentioned a whole bunch of really good things here in objection handling, and just to sort of recap a couple of those, it was asking questions back, trying to understand more about what the meaning is behind that, and being able to do the balance of cost and value or price and value trade-offs. You also mentioned hanging oars and these types of open-ended questions. These are all amazing tactics that honestly from my perspective, sound much more like a B2B SaaS sale or something like that versus a B2C, home service consumer sale. And I think what's really neat about the approach and process that you've taken is you're pulling in those kinds of tactics and bringing those into a type of sale that generally hasn't had those in the past. So that's very neat. Trying to switch gears a little bit more. You've been doing this for 16 years. And so, what are some of the common mistakes that you've seen, either when you're onboarding a new client or you've been working with a client for a while. What are some of these sort of common pitfalls that our listeners could think about and try to avoid or build their business to prevent?
Yeah, one of the bigger mistakes that we really commonly see when we start looking under the hood of a business is the flow from engagement to conversation with the client. And it seems so simple because it can be such a direct and small process, but it's so meaningful. And there's a plethora of reasons why this flow or process can break down, but undervaluing the phone as that touch point, that critical touch point, can really impact sales.
So when you
From
say
speed to
engage,
lead,
let me interrupt. When you
yes.
say engagement to conversation, like what exactly do you mean? Like,
A great example would be I go online, I'm looking for XYZ service. I find a site, I enter my information to find out more. I
okay,
want to know what their pricing is. I want to engage for business. I submit an information form on their website. So that would be one way to engage, or
so
pick up the
so
phone
like
and
from
call,
that
or
moment to the
yes.
meaningful interaction about this product or service. So you're saying like there's a big gap between those two for many businesses.
From that moment of submission to the point where they actually speak with them live.
Got it.
And that would be the thing where I see there's a lot of mistakes made, or not even mistakes made, but things that could be done better, optimized, or adjusted to increase the client experience and increase the sales and the closing rates and things like that. And that's part of it is people driving towards trying to handle things via email or text message to a larger audience of people that prefer phone calls. Now, as we, shift in technology and people are busier and less responsive to phone calls, everyone's inundated by spam these days. So being able to distinguish yourself as who you are, what you're looking to accomplish, and pulling in the information that they've submitted can really, really help with that. Another big thing that we see a lot of times with businesses is just lacking SOPs, standard operating procedures that can lead to inconsistent client experiences. If you handle every interaction too differently, you'll never have a baseline of what's working well for your business.
You mentioned two things. So like one is on that from lead form to meaningful conversation. Yes, I've worked with a business here in Denver and we were talking about their speed to lead and said, "Oh, we're doing great. We're following up with all of our customers." And you're like, "Okay, so what's going on?" We're like, "How do we really uncover this?" And it's like, "So how many calls have you really made on them?" And I was trying to understand the follow-up structure. And he said, "What do you mean calls? I've emailed every single one of them." And so I think that's one of those sort of common breakpoints that we see is that businesses are getting leads and they're just following up via email and sort of expecting somehow magically this sale is going to happen when it does require more active touch points than that, like email, text, and phone, and what's the cadence and how does that work? Um, so I think that's yeah, that's a really really important part you brought up there.
Yeah, I think opening up all three lines of communication is huge for every lead that you communicate with. Being able to capture that information on the front end, I see some businesses miss as well. When we represent some of these independent, small business owners who are just starting out, it's one of the common fallacies is they only have a phone call or they only have a web form, but the web form doesn't capture their contact number or their preferred time to talk or any of that kind of stuff. So adjusting those things to capture more and capture better information is huge. The other thing, just again as I'm thinking about that, tying off of the frontline communication, is the follow-up communication. So many business owners miss the second attempt or the ability to reach out. To your point, I emailed everybody. Great. Well, then should follow with a phone call, text message, and all that. But also, when they don't respond to that first one, what is your structure and cadence for following up? Do you follow up? When you've quoted them and they haven't moved forward, are you continuing to work with them and close the communication loop with whatever reason they said, hey, I can't move forward right now because of X, Y, and Z? Or once the conversation happens initially, are they just off into the ethers and they'll come back if they come back and they don't if they don't? And we see a lot of small business owners that don't have set procedures for how to follow up at the right time or at all.
Absolutely. Another thing you mentioned is, and this is just back a few minutes and I wanted to touch on, is that a lot of times leads are handled inconsistently. And so what that really makes it hard to do is understand your marketing ROI or understand, what's working and what's not. If, for example, all of your leads from one source are handled a specific way and all of your leads from another source are handled another defined way, you can start to fine tune, you can make improvements, you can understand where you should be offering discounts. But if everything is handled differently from speed to lead, the flow, the follow-up structure, it becomes really hard to make data-driven decisions. And so I think that's another really important one to touch on. And it's a really hard thing to get right because a lot of business owners maybe aren't operating 7 days a week, aren't, for their sales team, or, they're out in the field, or they're dealing with an employee issue or a customer escalation. And so the leads are just not being handled consistently. And so it makes that data element tough. I see you smiling. You might have something to add on this.
Yeah, I'm smiling because how often do we hear from these small business owners upon embarking with service that they have a feeling about how something is going? That, oh, I feel like this is the best lead type. I feel like I'm doing okay. I feel like I'm closing 50% of my leads. But data driven, and this is where I'm smiling because 16 years ago, I was the gut guy. I was the guy, I feel this way, so it's this way. I'm running and operating policies and procedures based on how I feel these experiences are going. And I've become exactly the opposite of this through time. And this is where I feel like a lot of small, medium business owners start with the gut feel, but don't have the organization systems or things in place to do data driven split tests or have these data driven results. And this is one of the things that, again, over the course of time here, that I've just grown to accept is like, this is the way. This is how you have to do this, is use that data to drive those policies and decisions. And you have to track that data to be able to do that.
Yeah, you're reminding me of about, I think it was maybe a year and a half ago, we started doing some split testing on Thumbtack, and
Yeah.
our clients in a particular vertical had an incredibly low conversion rate through Thumbtack. I think it was around 2% of all
2%.
leads. Yeah, and I mean, it was acceptable because the lead costs through that channel were not that high, but it was still quite low. And so, you know, you and I were sort of scratching our heads and said, well, either Thumbtack is a terrible lead source, but that can't really be. They've got a lot of like there must be good leads coming from Thumbtack, otherwise, what is it doing? And so we were able to split test and try different ways of communicating, different contact structures, different channels, and we were able to get that conversion rate, improve it by 7x. And so I think that that's exactly the kind of way that you want to be using data, but you have to be implementing consistent processes so that you know what's working and what's not. Okay, that was a great conversation. And any other mistakes or common pitfalls you want to touch on too, Jason?
No, I mean, I think that's the big stuff. Following up well, following up at the right time, making sure that you have standard procedures to fall back on so that you can measure data that you're using. Those would be the biggest things that I see most business owners do. But there's a bunch of other little things that people don't do along the way too.
Well, that's a really good segue into, I think, what's another really important topic is sort of scaling this. And a lot of these things that we've been talking about, sure, it can be manageable if you have one sales rep or if you're still doing the sales yourself. These are tactics that you can bring in and take, but it becomes harder when you have 2, 3, 5, 15 sales reps, focusing on this. So how do you get consistency across, across a team as it scales?
Two ways, I think. Having a defined process is the first thing, like having actual documentation that you can deliver and use and reference. It creates predictability, it creates that scalability, and it creates accountability because you all have something that you're agreeing to. And you have to map out kind of that ideal customer journey. You have to have consistent verbiage for key touch points. And again, back to that, not script per se, but just a flow of how that information should be delivered. And then building training modules around them so that you can give a framework for a team to set them up for success. And then coaching and follow up and maintaining a level of quality that as you go and grow your business is so critical.
Yep. I'd also say, just to add one more part to that, not to try and make it more complex, but the right kind of incentive structures too. Like there's so many things that surround this in a sales environment that I think make it a fun environment, from culture, incentives, accountability, growth pathways. There's so much that goes into this, and I think that's another thing that can get tricky for organizations that are at that tipping point of growth. Um, so any other, just to sort of think about that scale, any other tips and tricks for sales operators that are trying to grow and not lose control of that quality?
Use technology. There's a lot of technology out there,
All right,
but use it
what do
with
you mean?
human
Yeah.
oversight.
Yeah.
Well, so from running things through AI to call recording to transcription softwares to coaching tools and bots and things like that. Again, they're great tools, but with human oversight, they're the best tools that they can be. And so using call monitoring tools, analytics, tracking that performance, but having someone that's responsible for coaching and modeling those practices. One of my favorite sayings is quality isn't a one-time achievement, it's a daily commitment. And that's something that, again, having that and embodying that within your personal core values and with your team's core values allows you to do a lot more.
Yeah. And I just want to emphasize the opportunity that is coming here with AI in this space because quality monitoring is so important and it does require focus. Historically, 10 years ago, that was a QA or a QM team that was like literally listening and scoring all the calls. But again, you're adding these human elements to it, which introduces variability despite how structured you try and make that. I think what's really exciting about what's coming now is that AI is allowing us to listen, score, and provide feedback on every call. And over in the past, we have had active listening with AI on all of our calls, actively proactively providing prompts to our sales agents. And we're continuing to advance on that as AI continues to get more accessible and better at in these areas. So I think there's a lot coming there that's going to make it easier to scale, which is really fun.
Yep. Yeah. And always keep an eye on that customer experience. That's the thing that a lot of times as businesses grow and scale, they kind of turn a blind eye because they're dealing with a lot of other things. But making sure that that frontline customer experience is always at its peak. Frontline first is a term I hear tossed around a lot. And that's something that, again, we do really well is making sure that not only are our frontline teammates taken care of, but that frontline customer experience is taken care of as you scale.
Perfect. So to kind of wrap this all up, Jason, if you had to give one piece of advice to an owner starting out, either hitting the phones for the first time for their new franchise or building their B2C sales team, what would you tell them?
Do what you're best at and outsource the rest. But no, in all honesty, I'd say document, document, document. The more you document, the more you can reference, the more you can see what's working and not, and make adjustments or changes.
Yep. Yeah, I like that. Sales is always evolving, and the way we execute sales for our clients is always continuing to evolve. And so, knowing what's working and what's not is the best way to get better. So that's great.
Yep.
So, where can listeners connect with you to keep the conversation going or follow up if they have questions?
You can always connect with me on LinkedIn or visit rainmaker.ai. I'm always happy to share insights, collaborate with like-minded professionals, and talk sales. I love it. I do it all day. It's kind of my superhero secret cape. I love talking sales. So
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining me, Jason. And thanks everybody for listening in and looking forward to sharing more with you on how to make growth happen.